Welcome, welcome. See some people joining in. Tim, I'm back to back here, man. I just finished an MSP initiative webinar.
That's your whole day, right? Webinar to webinar. You know, you just got promoted to the VP, so now you got like more work on top of what you were doing.
Yeah.
So, and at some point you're supposed to fit like a bio break, maybe grab something to eat, a water, right? Where do you fit that in?
Just got to run fast. So thanks everyone for joining. We see you rolling in. We're just Tim and I are, trying to provide some quality banter before we get started here.
Yeah. So what's the next shows you guys are going to be at?
I'm going to be at Exchange.
Yep.
And then I'm going to go from Exchange to Seven Figure, and then I'm going into Robin Robbins and Philly as well. That's the rest of this month.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah. So I'll be with you Exchange. I'll be with you at Seven Figure. And then I think I got a week off or so, and it's back out to was a Channel Pro there in DC, right? Yeah. And then we start rolling into a really crazy month of shows in September.
Yeah. Well, Tim, it looks like we had some people join. The people who joined on time, I don't want to punish them by having to listen to, nonsensical banter, for 5 minutes while we wait for the late attendees to arrive. So let's just jump into it. Little housekeeping. We will have a recording. We'll make sure we send it out to everyone who registered. We'll get it on YouTube or whatever. If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I believe we sorted our last webinar, the chat got disabled. I figured out the Zoom setting to fix that. There's also a Q&A button, so feel free to use that. Would love, people, I'm in New York. I'd love to see where the audience is. Feel free to put your location in the chat just so we can get it started and, have some participation. Tim, where are you today?
I'm always in the great town of Kansas City, right? Barbecue is in my blood.
That's great, man. I had fun with you when we were in Kansas City a couple months ago. See some Philly people, some Minneapolis people join in. Philly people, Robin Robbins Roadshow at the end of the month. We'll be down there. So Chicagoland. Thanks everyone for participating. What were you going to say, Tim?
No, I was just saying that Kansas City's such a weird town. Like I've lived kind of all over the world, different places, different times. I always like Kansas City. It's this weird little town that there's enough going on from food and culture and everything else. And quite honestly, the tech hub here is kind of insane in and of itself, but it's not so large you can't get across it, right? I mean, like where you live, it takes some effort to get across your town. Where I live, it's 30 minutes, 40 minutes on a good day.
Yeah, well, you got somebody shouting out Jack.
That's
Jack
right.
Barbecue in the chat, David there. So my name is Jimmy Hatzel. I'm the Vice President of Revenue at QuickPass. We're talking about MSP versus MSSP today. I have some experience. My background is in cybersecurity. I worked at an MSSP, you could say, in a previous life. Tim, why don't you give a brief introduction of yourself? You got a long history in the MSP world, so.
Yeah, so my name is Tim Coach. I currently work at one of the really good companies out there, which is Gradient MSP. We offer some billing reconciliation, which is fantastic because it's a time and money software that really helps people, true up their billing, right? There's not been an easy way to do that. But the reason why I'm here is more than just that. It's really my background was I started out as a client for, a decade or so. And then I just got lucky and jumped over into MSP. I don't know really how lucky that was. I call myself a recovering MSP. I spent about a decade doing that. But really what I did at that time was I had a partner and we rebuilt MSPs from processes and procedure standpoint. Like some of them need to be completely rebuilt. Some of them just need a little bit of tweak here and there, right? And I was lucky to do that. And then, I don't know, last year I was like, man, I need to make a change. I need to stir up my career again, get motivated again. And I thought the channel was the way. And Gradient had this great product already and then they refined that product even more. And I was like, man, this is really something that's serving the community, and I want to be a part of that. And that's how I got into the channel. But yeah, it's the MSP world is very unique. And I love this world, and I love the ecosystem that exists between now us as, quote unquote vendors, right?
Mhm.
The MSPs as the clients, and then their clients. It's really kind of this whole crazy world that we live in, where we're trying to take care of each other. And coming to Gradient really just allowed me to do that.
That's great. Well, it's been a pleasure. I've worked with you in a past life, worked with you in your MSP days, and to, work with you here today it's been a pleasure. And also seeing you at a lot of the channel events. I've seen you speak before. If you ever get a chance to hear Tim speak, definitely listen. He's got some knowledge he brings down. I guess you have a chance right now. I guess that's what we're doing right now. So
Right. I mean, it's like, okay, so we have all these things going on in the industry, and there's a lot of webinars, and there's a lot of stuff that's going on, and some of this stuff is just noise, right? It's people that's putting their time and effort in. I don't want to degrade that by any means, but it's like, it's not very often I hear someone tackle a really hard subject, right? And that's what we're talking about today. We're talking really kind of two different subjects. We're talking about an MSP versus an MSSP, and which way should these companies be going? Is there a way, or is there a direction for them to even go? Because we really have a hard time defining that, right?
Should we start with MSP? Maybe just
Yeah.
put that out there. So what is MSP? Like we go to the events, we hear, VARs, MSP, ISP, TSP, whatever. Like what does, I guess I should say, what does MSP mean to you? What are some qualifications or something?
Yeah, so an MSP stands for, so for me, like this is totally going to back up yet another webinar that you have going on. An MSP for me is, in the old days, I called it an outsourced IT department, right? So it's really a company that sells IT department as a service, right? Meaning everything from the help desk to engineers that can forklift, big environments, to CIO work, to project management work, whatever that scenario is. I mean, I used to, probably a couple times a year, I'd sit down and write like 20, 30 budgets for my clients on what their next year's IT spend was going to be. So it really is, at its most basic level, a managed service provider is an outsourced IT department that becomes part of the company. They're not a service, they become part of the company.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. I think the key thing there is managed services. Are you offering managed services? Because the outsourced IT department, it could just be like, there's the big movement from break fix to MSP, right? Like a monthly, services, doing proactive work versus just calling someone when, something's broken.
Yeah, because that's what, in the old days, that's what it was, right? So every industry has its, its advances. This industry started out as a break fix, right? So, and most of the time you were, it was pay as you play. And then it was like, well, we're not being very proactive. We're not doing patching like you should be doing. You're not doing any proactive work. You're not providing any reporting. You're not providing any forecasting. And then it was like, wait a minute, we have a much deeper role to play with these companies that we're servicing. So let's kind of talk about how to do that. And that's when you see when you see the transition go from, I'm going to bill by device, right? I'm going to come in. This was the worst, right? Back in the day, I'm going to count all your switches. I'm going to count your firewalls. I'm going to count your PCs, all this crap. So we finally got rid of that and said, you know what? We're going to go to where we're just focused on the people. So the companies I ran, we always talked about the heartbeat, right? Meaning the person. Like, I don't care how many computers a person has, because they can only use one at a time. So it was like, that's who I want to support. And then we were able to create a model for cost that supported the entire environment. So that's when we really went from break fix to focusing more on that partnership. Trusted partner was a big term for a lot of time, for a lot of years. That's where you really seen that transition go, is when you stopped nickel and diming the client and started worrying about the people.
Yeah. Now, Tim, I think so it seems pretty clear what MSP means. At least, we had an agreed upon definition of it. The key thing, it's IT services, but managed, right? That's the key thing in there, managed services. Now, when we're talking MSSP, I think a big reason we wanted to do this webinar and have this discussion is because it's not necessarily as clear. So is first of all, I guess in the same way you went from break fix to MSP, is the next thing, like, is it MSP to MSSP, or is it a totally separate thing? And then is there agreed upon definition of MSSP? What are your thoughts on this?
So before you can take the next step, you got to know what the next step is, right? There's got to be some definition in that step. Yeah. So I spent some time yesterday, I call it the magic box of knowledge. And I jumped on it, and it's, I started looking, I was like, I really want to see how we define this. Yeah. And it's all over the board. So I go out to one vendor, right? And they define it as pretty much anything networking. Well, I don't really think that's networking is the complete. Now, granted, I'm old and I was educated on the OSI model. So I think there's more to security than just the network, right? And then I go over to another, source. We would all call them a source of truth, and they define it as outsourced security. So now we're talking, like, if you're going to make this jump in this progress, which way are you going? Is it in-house? Is it outhouse? Or outhouse, right? Because that's what we're kind of is. Is it out of the house? Is it outside services? It's not clearly defined at this moment. So to sit here and say, I'm going to be an MSSP, I don't have a checklist that helps me do that. Now, MSPs also provide security as part of what they do, right? My particular, one of the bigger MSPs I worked at, we had a deep banking clientele. We had to provide security services, right? We started out with SIEM, and of course, we all know how expensive SIEM actually is to bring on, right? And then we went to what we called SIEM Lite. So we actually created our own product using a few other products, your prior product being one of those. And then we created that service. But in the banking world, you're always going through an audit and exam, right? So we always made sure that that's how we performed our services for them. Security's in there, but we wouldn't have called ourselves an MSSP. And it continues to be funny, because if you progress, how do you do that? It's also, let's talk about cost. You have dedicated labor cost if you want to be an MSSP, because that means you can't have a NOC anymore. Now you need a SOC, right? And your NOC people are not the same quality of education and experience as your SOC people are. SOC people tend to be more expensive. So can your MSP afford to go to that model, even if it was a real thing?
Yeah, Tim, I think, so I come from a little bit different perspective from it. And it's kind of funny because it intersects with exactly what you're saying. So, I came from Scout, cybersecurity, and, before back in the day, before we switched to a fully just working with MSPs like yourself and the MSP you were formerly at, we sold to direct customers. And the SOC 24/7 SOC monitoring and SIM or SIEM, like that service, when we would write out an order form or a contract, it was actually called MSSP service, right? And you would actually get like a consultant or a NIST, somebody would do like a NIST assessment or something, or somebody would some consultant or some CISO would be looking for something for a bank, and they'd say, we need MSSP services. And what they were talking about in that context was 24/7 security operations center, and SOC and SIM services as well. All, event log correlation with an actual human looking at the logs and watching and monitoring the alerts. So that was like, say that was 5 years ago. Now, a lot of these services have come down market a little bit more, and it's not just the enterprise companies, it's not just the mid-market companies, and you're getting, MSP adding more and more security services because they have to. If you're an MSP and you're not offering security, I don't know what you're doing, because I think we all are, right? Everything's security focused. Leading with security now is the big thing. Like, nobody's just maintaining, like password resets and stuff. Everybody's like has to do something with security, endpoints, patching, all that stuff. So then it makes sense. Like, oh, well, I'm a managed service provider, managed security service provider, but in the enterprise world and the mid-market world, that means that you're offering SOC services or SIM services. Even in some documentations or some requirements or some RFPs, it's going to, usually be referring to that. Whereas in the SMB market, if you have an MSP that's more security focused, and they might be calling themselves an MSSP, but not necessarily providing those services, but they're also providing IT services. And right, the MSSP originally did not include IT services, right? We weren't, touching desktops and endpoints and stuff like that. We're just monitoring when we were selling it that way. So you have this true definition confusion, right? It doesn't mean anything. That's what we were saying before. Like, MSSP doesn't mean anything in the MSP and SMB space anymore.
And why is that though? It's because there's no clearly defined checklist or term, right? Like, I'm out there looking at all this information, and I'm looking at government level, right? Like, surely the government, because they tell us everything else, is going to tell us what an MSSP. They don't. I found an article, and one of the articles is talked about is like, they're the top 10 things you need to be an MSSP. Great, I'm in. I want to read this article. I go in, and one of them is risk scoring. Okay, great. What is that? Once again, not defined. It's a general thought on what risk scoring actually is. So that just leads on into the conversation of MSPs are already providing security at various levels, right? So you went from a pretty deep security focused company to another security focused company, just in a different way, right? But then there's other ones and that's what you guys did at the old company. You guys had what you did, and then you added a couple of different services to kind of make it more robust.
Yep.
And that's what MSPs are already doing. They're finding vendors like you and like your old company. I'll throw some names out there just because they're ones I've personally worked with. Huntress. There's very few companies out there that are actually competing on that Huntress level. So it's like, if you're an MSSP and you don't have that module, then are you an MSSP? Because there's a piece of the security puzzle that you're not monitoring, right? If you look at all this high-end background monitoring you're doing, but you don't have something like QuickPass, are you truly an MSSP? Because there's sections of the security piece that you're just missing out on. So how do we as an MSP industry make those changes to become an MSSP if every step along the way is not clearly defined by any regulatory standards? It's just what this vendor thinks, or this vendor thinks, or this security magazine. They've all got their own definitions. It's kind of funny because as I was doing that research, the first one I hit gave me what they thought was an MSSP, right? Which is purely networking. And it was like an hour and a half later, I find another company that literally cut and paste the first company's information onto theirs with some other, banter in and out. So that's what it continues to confuse me, is how do we how do the MSPs make that progress when they don't have a clearly defined path to do that, right? It's not NIST certification. It's not, I think it's GDPR. It's not PCI compliancy. It's not HIPAA compliancy. There's no clearly defined path to doing it. So saying you're an MSSP, are you really just saying that you're security focused? And then do you have a NOC? Do you have a SOC? Do you have 24-hour service? right? Where's the standpoint? So I guess the question I would have for you is coming from someone that sold a lot of these services. Do you see that as something that the MSP should be pulling in house and trying to invest in? Or do you think that outsourced is probably the better way for them to go to get a faster turnaround on what they're trying to accomplish?
Good question. I've been through this a lot. I think if you want to offer 24/7 SOC and maintain your own SIM or XDR application, using the service in a non-managed way, the break-even point is usually around, like, I want to say 75 to 200. It can be employees at your MSP. I don't see how someone can run a 24/7 SOC profitably at a smaller scale, because you need analysts reviewing alerts and logs 24 hours a day. You need managers, and level, whatever, something gets escalated, you need someone who's going to be able to answer those questions 24 hours a day. You need to maintain all the technology, continuously updating rules and alerts and build integrations with so many different products. I just don't really see how it's possible without working with, a ConnectWise SOC or a Huntress or a Blackpoint or, Barracuda XDR or any one of these companies who can, manage that part of the business for you. I think you need to separate them out too. Like, you can't, like, your NOC and your SOC, like you're saying, it's a different skill set. They need to be segmented and they work together, certainly. But it's different skill, different employees, different everything. So to do it yourself, yes, for some people, but the overwhelming majority of MSPs, it's going to make more sense to find a really good outsourced partner and work together with them really well. And you'll also have a third party holding you accountable,
See, and I'm in total agreement with that. I think most MSPs do not have the capital, right, to just throw money at something, right? They really need to be very strategic about their financial path, right? You got to be fiscally responsible for your dollars. And I think that's one of the things that you got to look at. And one of the things, the progression that I've seen from some of the security companies out there is it was, okay, I partnered up with these people and they send me information, but they're not doing anything with it until I engage them. We're now starting to see that trend as these people progress, that they're actually stopping the action and they don't care the consequences. We see something funny going on, we're going to stop that action until we talk to somebody from the MSP. So then you talk to an MSP and maybe they got, 2 or 3 tier 3s if they're lucky, right? Really high-end guys that are focused on some high-end stuff. But if it's 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, now all of a sudden you're going through a call tree. And if nobody's stopping the bad activity, how far does that get into a client's network? Because you're waiting on someone to pick up the phone out of a dead sleep.
Yeah.
So I think go ahead.
I just think that they're different areas, right? Like there is some convergence, but I don't think it's like a clear, like I don't think it's like, oh, if you're an MSP, your next step to stay relevant is moving to an MSSP. I just don't think that's the case. I think that people still need IT services, and it's not like IT services are going to go away and you have to switch to all security services. I think people need security focused and security first IT services. And I think that there's a separate spend that people aren't necessarily used to that has to go towards security. And the majority of it is going to go towards MSPs and, a lot of those basic cyber hygiene things, but some of it might go towards, an MSSP or, an outsourced SOC or whatever. And that even could be built through an MSP. Barracuda, I worked there for a little bit. They would call it a security centric MSP, not an MSSP. They defined it that way. Like, listen, we work with security-centric MSPs. Those are MSPs providing managed IT services that are security-centric in their approach. And I don't think it's like this linear ladder where it's like MSP, MSSP, because MSSP to me implies that you're stopped providing IT services and you're just focusing on security, which I just don't think makes sense.
Yeah, and it's plus as an MSP, you're actually splitting your staff,
Yeah.
right? Where are they focused? So you're not getting the best bang for your buck out of your technical people, right? And that's one of the things that, an MSP, it's like they're really good at what they do, which is providing those services, right? Whether that service is I'm picking up the phone because Frank's calling me because, his printer's not working, right? We all love printer issues. Or, Sally's calling me because QuickBooks lost its integration or whatever the scenario is. Those are part services that MSPs provide.
Yeah.
Then you go a step up and now you're in level 2 where you're getting a little bit more complex, and you go level 3 where you're doing forklifts. People are moving to the cloud. In-house, and we'll get into this a little bit, like if we talk about pure labor cost, and as we're seeing the projections, what's coming in the future, in-house techs are making less and less sense unless the environment is so large that you need someone working a priority task, right? We can get a little bit of talk about co-managed, but the point is that why would you, from a labor rate, pay someone $60,000 a year, if that's what, that we'll call it a tier 2 in your environment is, right? But your services are limited to where you can go to an MSP that offers you so much more services for about that same cost. So, okay, now we're here, but now all of a sudden we're going to throw in the security aspect of it. So in my MSP, we just enforce the security aspect across the board, right? Because in MSP, standardization is extremely important, right? That's how you get your efficiencies up. That's how you get the ROI on your spend better. That's how you get profitability on contract better, is that standardization across the board and to get away from those unique situations. So when your MSP is just firing on all cylinders and you're doing really great at those services that an IT department would normally perform for you, now let's go to security, right? That's a whole different set of bodies and skill sets and functions, right, that they got to bring in. Most MSPs, right, unless you're probably in that 5 to 10 and $1 million range, don't really have the staff to do that unless they're just going to be a security service from an MSP standpoint. And then it's just a security focus.
Now, Tim, I've seen some companies, some MSPs actually create a separate LLC and create a separate MSSP where they do security assessments, SOC services, that kind of stuff under like a sister company, and they segment it for risk purposes, accountability purposes, all of that. What do you think about, doing something like that? Did you look at something like that before? Like, what are your thoughts?
So we never did, because the MSSP thing was really, as I was kind of pulling out of being an MSP, really just started to become that buzzword, right? Like it's heard it for a couple of years. It's been around for longer years on kind of that enterprise mid-market level. It was just never a thought for us. We knew we didn't have the talent. We knew we didn't have the time, and we knew we weren't going to put the effort and the money into it. So for the ones I worked at, it always made the most sense to outsource. Now, from a financial aspect, I think it totally makes sense. But where's your investment and what's your investment? If I'm going to spin off a company that's providing that, how many people do I need to provide 24-hour service? Or is it just Joe sitting over there on the side that works with the third and fourth party vendors that are actually providing that service? The good news about that is when you spin one off to the side, it's pretty easy to cut bait if things go wrong, right? And your primary business isn't at risk. But then, right, your reputation is. And how big is that? How big? Let's talk about that for a second. I like your perspective. What is the risk when you go out there and you're selling yourself as an MSSP and something happens to one of your clients and they come to you and you're like, well, you're an MSSP. So how, from your perspective, how do you sell that through to a client? And then how do you perform that as an MSP to a client?
Yeah, I mean, Tim, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give you, all the legal implications of it. But what I will say is if you're responding to, say, an RFP or something, and they're using MSSP, as what they need, you better look closely, because they might specifically be looking for log collection and correlation in that, in 24/7 security operations center might be a part of that as well. And if you're not providing those services, that could put you certainly at risk there. Saying you're security focused and then not providing security and somebody gets hacked, liability wise, I mean, that's a whole separate thing. It's a huge, cyber insurance companies are litigating this out. People get sued all the time. Again, like I said, I'm not a lawyer, so I can't give specific legal advice on it. But I will say it is not a very clear area on, where your risk is and where it isn't.
And that's, I think that's a perfect point, and not being a lawyer either, right? I could certainly sit here and be an armchair lawyer, but that gets you about, 2 steps down the road, if that. I think what MSPs fail to understand when they're trying to sell themselves as an MSSP is those legal repercussions and the insurance repercussions, right? So I used to always, so I was lucky enough that I consulted with several. One of the conversations that I would always have with the MSPs that I was consulting with is, do your clients actually understand your services? Now, everybody's going to say yes, but I guarantee you every time when I went to those clients and said, do you know that we don't do this? Do you know that we don't do that? Do you know that this is outside of your contract? They would all say no, because when those clients sign those contracts, they think that you have it all. Like you're just taking care of them, right? That's what they believe. So are you, as an MSP, having those conversations yearly with them to help them understand you're not? Because what's going to happen if something happens to them and they get breached or they lose some data, I guarantee you their cyber insurance company's coming after you, because the first things you're going to say is that, well, this MSP is the one that's supposed to be handling this. Now you add security into it, and it gets even more so, right? I mean, we seen, what was it? Not the beginning of this year, the beginning of last year. I think, well, maybe it was the beginning of 2022. We seen this huge push from cyber insurance that if you wanted to renew, you had to have MFA, right? Or 2FA, whichever way you want to call it. This industry, we've got a million acronyms that mean the exact same thing. So we've seen that. The problem is the insurance companies have no clue what that means, right? They're just like, oh, they MFA, it's multi-factor. That means they got to do it twice, not once, but it's twice. So let's enforce that, right? That's one of the things I used to love about being, in that banking industry, is the audits and exams. They almost set you up to show you what was coming down the pipe 2 and 3 years out, right? But it's like, we're going to see more and more of that, and we're going to see more pushback on these insurance claims and then paying them, that I think people are actually realizing. The other thing that we look at from a security standpoint is forensic evidence, right? Like if there's an issue, we have to figure out how that issue occurred. How do we do that? Because as an MSP, my first response when a client goes down is to rebuild the environment. The moment I rebuild that environment, I've destroyed the evidence. So if you're an MSSP, that security should be, if something happens here, how do we get them back up safely and leave the evidence in place? Because the insurance companies are going to want their own investigators to look at what happened and look at that environment. So I think the overselling of being an MSSP,
they might pay, if they pay, they're going to pay for one of their approved panels to go in and rebuild the environment. So you're doing work that you're not going to get paid for when somebody else could be, should be doing it for you.
Yeah, so a company I know of had an issue, right? They were smart enough to call the FBI, right? So it happened. They took the right steps first, and the insurance company brought in SentinelOne. This company had no relationship whatsoever to them. But that's who the insurance company trusted to bring in to do the audit. So it's like setting yourself up for these, deeper inspections of what you're doing is really kind of crucial. If you say you're an MSSP, that is quite a bit different than saying you're a security focused MSP.
Yeah. Yeah. And Tim, one thing I did want to go back to is this two companies thing. And the reason for it is security spend. So companies will have it depends on the company, but if it's something like banking, right, they're going to have an IT spend and they're going to have a security spend. And you tell a banking company, we're an MSSP now, we're providing 24/7 SOC services. Their contract is just about going to double, right? Say you're at 150 a user, 100 a user, right? An active person. If you're offering those 24/7 services, your cost there and to get profit on it, you're probably going to have to put them at 250, 300, if you're doing it in-house. So if you are trying to do this all yourself and you're saying you're an MSSP now, you have to compete, you have to price yourself with MSSP pricing, but also provide IT services on top of that. It's really hard to upsell your client 100% of their current contract. So either finding a partner, getting a lower total cost to it where it can be a little bit more digestible, like the Huntresses and stuff that we talked about, or, that I think that is another reason why some people will do it as a separate company, because then, you can at least get that warm introduction, and then the MSP can require certain security services, or MSSP services based on their industry or whatever. But it's not that spend, like you're not trying to upsell someone from 150 to 3, like a $5,000 a month contract becomes 10,000, right? Like it's very, very, very hard to do, especially in, small businesses.
It is. And presentation is everything, right? I mean, it's like how you present it to them. So I'll just, as Sandler tells you not to do, I'll spill a little bit of my candy here. So the way I used to do that is although we as an MSP industry are moving forward, although we as vendors are moving forward and we're taking those next steps to ensure everybody is secure, the clients still are not progressing enough to have that mindset, right? Yeah. So one of the ways that I used to do it, right, is like, SaaS services, right? Perfect example. If I'm doing SaaS services on security, right, it's like they're like, you can't up my contract by $50 a user, or you can't up my license by $20 a month. Okay, great. Well, I'm just going to take that $20, multiply it by 12, give you that one-time cost, and then amortize it on the financial back end, right? It's all half a dozen one way, right?
Yeah.
The other thing I would do is if I went in selling security services and they were like, oh man, it's going to do exactly that. It's going to double our cost when it comes to price per user. Yep. So what I would do is I would sell it as a service off and of itself, right? Mm-hmm. So now they're not seeing it as the individual cost and the price per user going up. They're seeing it as a bundle, right, to take care of those security services. So I'd sell them that bundle outside of the contract for the first 12 to 24 months. And then what I would do on the back end, it's a little bit of this, right? What I do on the back end is at the end of that contract, I just go in and say, hey, listen up. You guys have been paying for this for the last 24 months. How about I just roll that into your price per user cost? And then now we're back to the single line item. Everything you're getting because it's going to be spelled out in your contract. Oh, I love that. That's genius. Right? So part of it is understanding how the clients buy, not just, here's the security services you need. I'm going to double your price. It's understanding how they like to buy and then approaching it in that direction and then folding it into yours later on. Right? Same thing with non-for-profits. I love them. Right? They're great. The secret to non-for-profits is you have to fit into their budget in their budget year. That's not meaning next year when their budget comes up, you can't adjust and work with them. But up front, they're on a pretty strict budget. Same thing with selling security services as a bundle. You have to understand how they buy.
You're spot on there, Tim, man. I was just looking at some of these questions coming in, wanted to read through some of them. So somebody said, just a little confusion on what we do. So I didn't spell that out in the beginning. QuickPass is a cybersecurity software company that works with MSPs. We have a couple different products that make you more secure, but also more productive for the MSP business model. So apologies for not answering.
Yeah,
that.
so Jimmy's completely a security company. Gradient MSP is billing reconciliation. We focus on comparing your cost to your revenue directly in a UI. So that's where we talk about the importance of time and money. So although we're not a security industry, or a security company, we do have a heavy security compliance on us because we are constantly working with financials and data. So we want to make sure that our security level is increasingly high. I come from a security background, but Gradient MSP specifically is billing reconciliation. For now, we have a lot of stuff coming. You should keep an eye out. I'm just saying.
We had another comment about the lawyers thing, and that the lawyers don't even know, where the risk totally lies. And, some advice somebody put in there is, make sure that you're getting your contracts looked at, because you can limit as much of your liability as possible in the event that something happens. As we all know, security events do happen. Even if you have the best security, it can definitely, it just happens. It's just reality, the cyber landscape today.
Yeah, so let's kind of provide some advice there too. It's absolutely correct. The lawyers don't even know, but a lot of times it's like these smaller MSPs, they can't afford to go to a lawyer and have them review everything. Create a conglomerate. Find 4 or 5. I mean, we all go to shows, we all know each other. Find 4 or 5 other MSPs that you align with, and as a group, go to a lawyer, define that stuff out, and then everybody use it, and you split the cost, right? We constantly talk about ad hoc, right? We're kind of talking about ad hoc now. Let's ad hoc the security services to an outsourced company that knows what they're doing. Same thing here. So get it defined, power in the group, use that.
Yeah. What else? We had some more comments, more from Catherine. Catherine, thanks for participating so much in the chat here.
Yeah, Catherine's killing it. Like, she's just on it.
Jared, you might be sending a t-shirt to Catherine. I don't know. I mean, we got a couple minutes left. I don't know if anybody can compete there. Yeah, just the difference in mindsets when working with an MSP. Like, if you have somebody who's an employee at a company, they might just be focused on their individual job and their day-to-day and, influence spending or, process to make their lives a little easier, where an MSP is coming in, working directly with the owners of the business, trying to do what's best for the company. So love that comment there.
Yeah, no, it's been some good comments, and I really like this conversation. And it needs to be had, right? I'm tired of listening to people talk MSSP, and once again, no clearly defined standard. How are we supposed to know what we're supposed to be doing if we're just making it up along the road?
So Tim, let's just go final thoughts here. Is there a definition of MSSP?
No, there's absolutely no unified, standardized version that will say this is the check marks to be an MSSP. It's all theory and thought in individual companies.
Okay. And then I think I know what your answer is going to be here, but do you think that the next step for an MSP is to transform their business into becoming an MSSP?
Not until it's clearly defined. You can certainly become a security focused MSP, right? And that's the way I would present. I would present it as I'm a security focused MSP, but to go out and say I'm an MSSP, because that's the thing is, if your client is on the upper level, they're going to ask you how do you define that? And you could completely run yourself over by a statement that they don't believe is true. And the bottom line is, you can't tell them that they're not right or you're not right, because it's, at this point, educated guesstimations.
All right. Well, heard it here first.
Sorry, I'm all about kicking the elephant in the room. I'm like, let's have good discussions about subjects that nobody wants to touch, and because we need to get there, we need to define these things so the industry knows where to go. I think security focusing is fantastic. We all have to do it. I think for the majority of MSPs, that security focus is finding companies like yours, finding companies like Barracuda or Huntress or Blackpoint or whoever, and partnering with them, because now you're doing it more, you're doing it more on a monthly basis, so you can digest that cost a little bit better. Most MSPs, if they're, like I said, if they're below probably that $5 million mark, they're not going to be able to afford and invest in, quite honestly, the 24-hour maintenance it takes to be that way.
Yeah. We had another question just come in from Callie. What would y'all suggest for next steps for those considering switching to a more security-centric or MSSP offering? I get that there is no definition, but a lot of competitors are pushing that, so they just want to know what you would suggest.
So for me, what are you trying to accomplish? It's not just MSSP or security focus. Are you trying to accomplish SIEM? Are you trying to accomplish HIPAA? Like, what are your requirements? Until you define your requirements for security, you don't know which way to go. Now, once you have those defined requirements, what I would tell you is to go to any show, any of them. You can't swing a rubber chicken and not hit a security company at a tech show right now, right? I mean, it's just, they're out there. Go to a show, find the ones that meet your criteria, and then bring it back, involve your technical staff, and really do that research that meets whatever the criteria is, and then hire that service out. I'm telling you, your staff probably doesn't want the extra work as it is, and they would appreciate you going and doing some research, finding the information for them, and then making a group decision on how to move forward. But until you know those standards, it's free game.
Yeah, one thing I always like to say, Tim, is security is a process. It's not a single product. You're not going to find some product that's going to solve it or set you apart or whatever. It's an ongoing thing. So you look at where you're at now, you look at where you want to get to, probably should pick a framework like NIST or CIS and align your processes and your technology to it. And then, just say over the next 18 months, we want to get to here. Here are the milestones we want to hit along the way. And that's how you can, begin making yourself more security focused and offering new services and those sort of things.
No, absolutely. I agree with that 100%.
All right, Tim. Well, is this conversation done? Are we going to end this here, or is there still more to be said?
This conversation is not done. This is a rabbit hole, and we are going to go down this rabbit hole. So basically what's going to go on next, and look for all of our LinkedIn posts. I'm sure it'll be out there. On August 31st, we're actually going to do a panel, right? So Jimmy and I obviously are a wealth of knowledge, maybe in our own heads, but we want to bring more people into this conversation. So we're going to bring Matt Topper in, who's the director of security at Gradient, so my own company. Jimmy's going to be on. We're going to bring in Matt Lee from Pax8, who we all know is a security guru, and we're going to bring in Eric Pinto from SOX Oder, right? So we want to continue having a conversation around this subject. And that next one is, let's bring it into a panel. So it's just not the Tim and Jimmy show. It's like, let's get everybody's opinion on this, and let's come to a conclusion, and let's drive an answer.
Great. All right. Well, I'm looking forward to that one. Some great industry names there. So can't wait.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be fun. This was fun. I appreciate this conversation. That's what I know. When we talked about this, Jimmy, it was like, do we really want to touch this? And I'm like, oh, come on, let's just kick it.
Yeah. I appreciate it, and appreciate the active chat and all the questions that came through. I guess we'll wrap things up there. And Tim, I'll be seeing you next week, man.
Yeah, we'll see you there. Everybody have a great day. Thank you so much for being on. We really enjoyed the conversation, the questions, and the comments.
Yep. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
All right.